The autumn air in New York's Greenwood Cemetery carried a crisp chill, rustling the golden-brown leaves scattered along the stone pathways. Alexander Carter stepped out of his sleek black Cadillac, adjusting the cuffs of his custom-made suit. He was a man of wealth and power, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm. Yet as he walked through the cemetery, past rows of old tombstones, he felt none of the authority that defined him in the corporate world. Today marked the 5th anniversary of his wife Evelyn's passing, and every year he made this lonely pilgrimage to honor the woman he had loved more than anything. At 43, Alexander had built an empire. As CEO of Horizon Technologies, a multi-billion-dollar tech firm, his name was synonymous with power and innovation. Yet as he walked through the cemetery, past rows of weathered tombstones and elaborate mausoleums, he felt none of the authority that defined him in the corporate world. Here, among the dead, he was just a man with a hollow ache in his chest that 5 years had done nothing to diminish. Today marked the 5th anniversary of his wife, Evelyn's passing. 5 years since the car accident that had shattered his carefully constructed world. 5 years of throwing himself into work, of 16-hour days and sleepless nights, of building higher walls around what remained of his heart. And every year on this day, he made this lonely pilgrimage to honor the woman he had loved more than anything. No board meetings, no mergers, no deadlines, just silence and the overwhelming grief that never seemed to fade, only changed shape. Evelyn's grave was in the eastern corner of the cemetery, beneath the spreading branches of an old oak tree. She had loved trees, had insisted they buy a house with a garden large enough for at least 3. They never got around to that. Life had gotten in the way. His work, her charity projects, the silent sacrifices they had both made for a future that never came. As he approached her grave, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel, Alexander noticed something unusual. A small boy sat beside Evelyn's headstone, his tiny arms wrapped around his knees. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, dressed in a thin, faded jacket despite the biting cold. His brown hair was tousled by the wind, and his face, pale and innocent, bore an expression of deep sorrow that seemed too heavy for his young shoulders. Alexander's brows furrowed. It was rare to see strangers near his wife's grave. He had made sure of it, selecting this private corner of the cemetery, paying extra for the exclusivity. Who was this boy, and why did he look as if he belonged there? Clearing his throat, Alexander spoke, his voice carrying the weight of curiosity and authority. "Hey, kid, are you lost?" The boy looked up, his large tear-filled eyes locking onto Alexander's with an intensity that made him pause. There was something oddly familiar about those eyes, the same warm brown as Evelyn's, with the same slight upward tilt at the corners. Something that sent a strange uneasiness crawling up his spine. The boy shook his head slowly. "No," he whispered, his voice small but clear in the cemetery quiet. "I came to see my mom." For a moment, Alexander thought he had misheard. His heart pounded against his ribs, and a cold, creeping sensation settled in his chest. "You're what?" he asked, his voice unsteady in a way it never was during million-dollar negotiations. The boy hesitated before pointing to the name engraved on the marble headstone, Evelyn Carter. The world seemed to tilt beneath Alexander's feet. He felt his breath hitch, his mind racing in a desperate attempt to make sense of what he had just heard. His wife had never been pregnant, at least not to his knowledge. They had talked about having children in those early years of marriage, Evelyn's eyes lighting up at the possibility, but life had gotten in the way. The long work hours, the stress, the silent understanding that there would be time later. And then, before they could ever make it happen, she was gone, taken in a tragic accident that had left Alexander shattered. Yet here stood a child claiming to be her son, his hands clenched into fists, his pulse roaring in his ears like a stormy sea. He knelt beside the boy, the damp earth soaking through the knees of his $1,000 pants. His usually composed demeanor cracked at the edges as he searched the child's face for answers. "What did you say?" His voice was quieter this time, almost afraid of the answer. The boy sniffled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "She was my mom," he repeated, his eyes never leaving Alexander's face. "She used to visit me before she went away." A chill raced down Alexander's spine, colder than the autumn wind. His mind screamed that this was impossible. If Evelyn had a child before they met, wouldn't she have told him? And if she had given birth to this boy after their marriage, why had she never said a word? 8 years together, sharing a home, a bed, a life. How could she have hidden something so monumental? He studied the child more closely, his business-trained eye for detail, cataloging every feature. The resemblance was undeniable. The same soft brown eyes, the delicate curve of his nose, the slight dimple in his left cheek when he frowned. It was as if he was looking at a piece of Evelyn that had somehow remained in this world, hidden from him until now. Swallowing hard, he forced himself to stay calm. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice rough around the edges. "Liam," the boy answered softly, his small fingers still tracing the letters of Evelyn's name on the cold marble. The name meant nothing to Alexander. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, shock, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal that threatened to bring him to his knees. If this child was telling the truth, it meant that Evelyn, his Evelyn, had kept a life-altering secret from him. But why? And how? His wife had been the one person he had trusted completely, the only one who had ever seen the man beneath the polished billionaire exterior. She wouldn't have hidden something like this unless she had a reason that now lay buried with her 6 feet under the ground they stood on. Alexander exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair, now threaded with silver at the temples, each one earned in the years since her death. "Where do you live, Liam?" he asked, his businessman's mind already calculating possibilities, solutions, damage control. The boy hesitated again, his fingers tracing the edge of Evelyn's tombstone as if drawing comfort from the cold stone. "At the shelter," he finally admitted, his voice smaller now. "In Brooklyn. They take care of me there." Alexander felt his chest tighten, a pressure building behind his ribs that had nothing to do with his recent physical. A child, Evelyn's child, living in a shelter. The very thought made his stomach churn. How could this have happened? Why wasn't he with family? Where was his father? A sudden thought hit him like a freight train, stealing his breath. "Who told you Evelyn was your mother?" Liam glanced up, his expression filled with innocence and a sadness that seemed to reach beyond his years. "Miss Joan at the shelter," he said. "She said my mommy left me there when I was a baby, that she loved me but couldn't keep me." His voice trembled slightly. "She used to visit sometimes, but then she stopped coming." "Miss Joan said she went to heaven." His small voice broke on the last word, and Alexander felt something inside him crack, a fissure in the carefully constructed walls he had built around his grief. Evelyn had been visiting this boy. While he had spent years believing he had known everything about her, there had been an entire part of her life he had never even suspected. A secret child, abandoned at a shelter. What had been so terrible, so impossible that she had chosen to keep this from him? Had she not trusted him? Had she feared his reaction? The questions multiplied in his mind, each one more painful than the last. The wind picked up, sending a shower of leaves cascading around them. Alexander noticed Liam shiver, his thin jacket providing little protection against the autumn chill. Without thinking, he shrugged off his coat and draped it around the boy's shoulders. It engulfed him completely, making him look even smaller. "Come on," Alexander said, rising to his feet and offering his hand. "It's getting cold. Let's get you somewhere warm, and then we can figure this out." Liam looked at the outstretched hand for a long moment, uncertainty written across his young face. Then, slowly, he placed his small hand in Alexander's, a gesture of trust that felt heavier than any business contract Alexander had ever signed. As they walked back toward the car, Alexander cast one last glance at Evelyn's grave. For 5 years, he had come here seeking peace, seeking closure. Instead, he had found more questions than answers, and a child who might just be the key to understanding the woman he thought he had known completely. For the first time in years, Alexander Carter didn't know what to do. But one thing was certain, he couldn't just walk away. Alexander stood frozen in place, his breath forming small misty clouds in the cold New York air. The little boy beside his wife's grave, this child named Liam, had just shattered everything he thought he knew about Evelyn. His mind refused to accept the possibility, but the emotions churning in his chest told a different story. He had built his empire on logic, strategy, and careful decision-making. Every acquisition, every market expansion, every product launch had been calculated to minimize risk and maximize return. Yet here he was, staring into the tear-filled eyes of a child who bore an uncanny resemblance to the woman he had loved, and all his business acumen offered no guidance. Every fiber of his being wanted to deny it, to walk away and convince himself that this was some mistake, some cruel prank. But he couldn't. Something in Liam's face, in the way he clung to the gravestone, as if it were his last connection to a mother he barely knew, anchored Alexander to the moment. He swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. "Who else knows about this?" he asked, his voice quieter now measured. Liam looked down, kicking at the fallen leaves near the headstone. "Just Miss Joan," he murmured. "She told me when I was old enough to understand. She said my mommy loved me, but couldn't take care of me." His small fingers traced the engraved letters of Evelyn's name. "She used to come sometimes, but then she stopped." The boy hesitated before looking up again, his eyes searching Alexander's face. "Did she stop because of you?" The question hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He staggered back slightly, caught off guard by the raw innocence in Liam's voice. His heart pounded as the implications settled in. Had Evelyn kept this child a secret from him out of guilt? Had she feared his reaction? He had never been cruel. At least he didn't think so. Demanding, yes. Perfectionistic, certainly. But he had loved Evelyn with everything he had. Or had he? Had he been so consumed with building his company that he had missed signs of her unhappiness, her secrets? He was a man who valued control, who expected honesty, who never dealt well with unexpected chaos. Had she been afraid that telling him would destroy them? He crouched down, leveling his gaze with Liam's. "I didn't know about you," he said, his voice laced with a mix of regret and disbelief. "If I had," but even as he said the words, he wondered if they were true. Would he have accepted this? Would he have taken another man's child and raised him as his own? His fingers curled into fists, frustration burning inside him. He needed answers, real answers, and there was only one place to start. Straightening up, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number for his private investigator, Daniel Reeves. The man had been on his payroll for years, discreetly handling everything from background checks on potential business partners to security concerns. "I need you to look into something for me," he said the moment the line connected. "A boy named Liam at a shelter in Brooklyn. Find out everything. How he got there, who his biological father is, and if there are any records connecting him to Evelyn." He ended the call before Daniel could ask any questions. Right now, he didn't have the patience for explanations. He turned back to Liam, who was watching him with cautious curiosity. The boy's shoulders were hunched against the cold, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his thin jacket. "Come with me," Alexander said, offering his hand. The boy hesitated. "Where?" "Somewhere warm. You shouldn't be out here in this cold." Liam glanced at the headstone one last time, his fingers trailing over Evelyn's name in a silent goodbye, before slipping his small hand into Alexander's. It was a simple gesture, yet it sent an unexpected wave of emotion crashing over him. A protectiveness he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. He led the boy to his car, opened the passenger door, and helped him buckle the seatbelt. Liam looked tiny in the leather seat, his feet barely reaching the edge. Alexander turned the heat up high, watching as the boy held his hands in front of the vent, warming his fingers. The streets of New York passed by in a blur, their usual bustling energy dulled by the weight of the moment. Alexander's mind raced with questions. If Evelyn had hidden a child from him, what else hadn't she told him? Had he ever really known her at all? When they reached the shelter, a modest brick building tucked between two towering apartment complexes in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn, Alexander parked and stepped out. Liam followed hesitantly, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets as they walked inside. The air smelled of disinfectant and old books, with an underlying hint of too many people in too small a space. The front desk was manned by a tired-looking woman in her 60s, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She adjusted her glasses as she noticed Liam. "Back already, sweetheart," she said kindly. Then her gaze shifted to Alexander, her expression turning wary. "And you are?" "Alexander Carter," he said, pulling out his wallet and sliding a business card across the counter. The embossed logo of Horizon Technologies gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "I need to speak with Miss Joan." The woman hesitated for a moment, studying his card, then his face, as if trying to reconcile his expensive suit with the run-down shelter. Finally, she nodded and disappeared down a hallway. Alexander took the moment to look around. The walls were painted a faded yellow, peeling in places. A bulletin board displayed children's artwork and announcements for community services. A small play area in the corner held toys that had seen better days. Plastic bins of mismatched blocks, dolls with missing limbs, books with torn pages. How many children lived here? How many, like Liam, were waiting for families that might never come? A few minutes later, a petite gray-haired woman emerged from the hallway. She wore a simple cardigan over practical slacks, but there was a sharpness to her gaze that suggested she wasn't easily intimidated. She looked at Liam first, giving him a warm smile, then turned to Alexander, her sharp blue eyes studying him. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone unreadable. "I was wondering when you'd come." Her words sent another shock wave through him. "You knew who I was?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Miss Joan nodded, folding her hands in front of her. "Evelyn told me about you," she admitted. "She made me promise never to reach out, never to tell you. She wanted to protect both of you." "Protect me from what?" he demanded, his patience wearing thin. The business world had taught him to cut through pleasantries when seeking information. From the truth, the older woman sighed, then corrected herself. "From the pain. Evelyn loved you, Mr. Carter, but she had a past she never could escape from. When she met you, she had already made the hardest decision of her life, giving up Liam so he could have a chance at a better future." Miss Jones' eyes softened slightly. "She wanted to tell you, but by the time she worked up the courage, she was gone," Alexander finished, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. Miss Joan nodded, her gaze drifting to Liam, who stood silently beside Alexander, his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. She visited him when she could, brought him books, clothes, toys. She made sure he was taken care of, even if she couldn't be the one to raise him. Alexander felt his stomach twist. He had spent years grieving Evelyn's loss, believing he had known her better than anyone, and yet there had been a part of her life that had remained hidden from him, a part that included monthly visits to this shelter, to this boy. "Why didn't she keep him?" he asked, the question burning in his throat. "We had money, resources. She could have told me." Miss Jones' expression turned grave. "That's something you'll have to discover for yourself, Mr. Carter. It wasn't my place then, and it isn't now." She paused, studying him. "The question is, what do you intend to do now that you know?" Alexander turned to Liam, who was staring at the floor, small shoulders hunched as if bracing for rejection. His heart clenched at the sight. This child had already been abandoned once by his mother, and now he stood in a shelter, waiting to see if history would repeat itself. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel: anger at Evelyn for keeping this from him, sorrow for the boy who had grown up without a mother, or guilt for not knowing sooner. All three emotions warred within him, none gaining the upper hand. Taking a deep breath, he faced Miss Joan again. "What happens to him now?" She gave him a measured look. "That depends on you, Mr. Carter. He has no family, no legal guardians. He's been here since he was a baby." Her voice softened. "If you walk away, nothing changes. He stays here, waiting for a home that may never come. But if you decide to be part of his life." She left the sentence hanging, the implication clear. Alexander felt the weight of the decision settling over him. He had walked into the cemetery today, expecting to leave flowers and grieve in silence. Instead, he had walked out with a child who might be his responsibility, a child who was connected to the woman he had loved more than anything. He looked down at Liam, who still hadn't met his eyes. The boy's jacket was worn at the elbows, his shoes scuffed, and a size too small. How long had he been waiting here, hoping for someone to choose him? Slowly, cautiously, Alexander reached out and placed a hand on the boy's small shoulder. "Come on, kid," he said quietly. "Let's get out of here." Liam finally looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, then hesitant hope. "Where are we going?" Alexander hesitated. He couldn't promise forever, not yet. But he could offer something better than this place, with its faded walls and broken toys. "Home," he said simply. "At least for now." Without a word, Liam followed Alexander out the door. The billionaire CEO had spent years building an empire, controlling every aspect of his life with precision. But as he walked out of that shelter with Liam at his side, he realized that for the first time in years, he was stepping into the unknown. And strangely, it didn't terrify him as much as it should have. Miss Joan watched them go, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Evelyn," she whispered to the empty room, "I think you might have been wrong about him after all." Alexander drove through the bustling streets of New York, the weight of the night's revelations pressing heavily on him. The city's bright lights and constant motion felt surreal, as if he had been thrust into someone else's life. Someone who took in orphaned children on a whim. Someone whose heart wasn't carefully guarded behind walls of ambition and control. He glanced at Liam, who sat quietly in the passenger seat, small hands gripping the edges of his oversized jacket. The boy looked out the window, his face reflecting a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty in the passing streetlights. Alexander had negotiated billion-dollar deals with less anxiety than he felt now. How was he supposed to comfort a child he had just met, especially when that child's very existence upended everything he thought he knew about his marriage? His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus on what needed to be done next. Children needed structure, routine. That much he knew from the parenting books Evelyn had once left on his nightstand, a subtle hint he had been too busy to acknowledge. Pulling into the underground parking of his Upper East Side penthouse, he shut off the engine and turned to Liam. "Come on," he said, his voice softer than usual. The boy hesitated for a moment before nodding and following him into the private elevator. As the doors closed, the silence between them grew heavier. Alexander had always been comfortable in silence. Negotiations, business meetings, boardrooms filled with high-stakes decisions. But this was different. This wasn't about stocks or mergers. This was about a boy who had lost everything before he even had a chance to understand what having a family meant. "It's on the top floor," Alexander said, just to break the silence. "You can see the whole city from up there." Liam nodded, but didn't speak, his eyes fixed on the elevator buttons as they lit up one by one, tracking their ascent. Alexander noticed his reflection in the polished elevator doors. A small, thin child with shadows under his eyes that no 6-year-old should have. When they stepped into the penthouse, Liam's eyes widened, taking in the high ceilings, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Manhattan and the sleek minimalist furniture that filled the vast space. A massive crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the marble foyer, and beyond it, the living room opened up with its leather sofas and glass coffee tables, each selected by an interior designer who had charged more for her services than most people made in a year. It was a home designed for a man who lived efficiently, not for a child. Alexander suddenly realized how cold and impersonal it must seem to Liam. There were no toys, no signs of warmth, no evidence that a family had ever lived here. Because one never had. The only personal touch was a single photograph of Evelyn on the mantelpiece, her smile frozen in time, her eyes holding secrets he had never suspected. Clearing his throat, Alexander set his keys down on the marble counter. "You hungry?" Liam hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, a little." Alexander wasn't sure what kids ate. Did he even have anything in his fridge that wasn't expensive wine or pre-prepared gourmet meals? He opened the refrigerator, scanning the neatly organized shelves before settling on something simple. "How about grilled cheese?" he offered, remembering that it had been Evelyn's comfort food, something she'd make on rare rainy Sundays when they both stayed home. Liam's face brightened just a little. "Okay." It was such a small thing, But the hint of warmth in the boy's voice made something in Alexander's chest loosen. He wasn't good at this, at caring for someone else, at putting their needs before his, but he could at least make a sandwich. As he worked in the kitchen, the sizzle of butter on the pan filling the space, Liam wandered toward the living room, his small hands running along the edges of the bookshelves. Alexander watched him from the corner of his eye, noting how carefully the boy moved, as if afraid to disturb anything. Liam stopped in front of the framed photograph on the mantel, the one of Evelyn. It had been taken during their trip to the Amalfi Coast, her hair windblown, her smile radiant against the backdrop of the Mediterranean. His fingers hovered over the glass, as if afraid to touch it. She was really pretty, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sizzling pan. Alexander swallowed hard. He walked over, standing beside Liam as he looked at the photo of the woman they had both lost in different ways. Yeah, he said quietly. She was. The boy turned to him then, searching his face. Did you love her? The question hit Alexander in a way he hadn't expected. Love. It was such a simple word, but it carried so much weight. He had loved Evelyn with everything he had, or so he'd thought. But now he realized there had been so much about her that he had never known. Did that mean his love had been incomplete? Based on a version of her that wasn't fully real? He exhaled slowly. Yeah, I did, he admitted. A lot. Liam nodded, as if that answer satisfied something deep inside him. Miss Jones said she loved me too, he whispered. But she couldn't keep me. His voice wavered slightly, and Alexander felt a tightness in his throat. This kid had spent his whole life wondering why his mother hadn't stayed, and now, standing in a stranger's home, he was probably wondering if he was about to be left behind again. The sandwich is ready, Alexander said, retreating to the kitchen where emotions were simpler to manage. Come eat while it's hot. They ate in silence at the kitchen island, Liam's legs dangling from the high stool. Alexander noticed how the boy took small, careful bites, as if savoring each one, the habit of someone who had learned that good things might not last. He made a mental note to stock the pantry with proper food tomorrow. What did children need? Fruit? Cereal? He would have to research, or better yet, have his assistant handle it. After dinner, Liam sat curled up on a massive leather couch, his small frame nearly swallowed by the plush cushions. Alexander sat in the armchair across from him, sipping a glass of scotch, lost in thought. He had already instructed Daniel to dig deeper into Evelyn's past, to find out everything about Liam's father, if he was still alive, if he posed any kind of threat. But a part of him already knew what the investigator would find. Liam had no one else. Just him. That realization settled heavy in his chest. As the hours passed, Liam's blinks grew slower, his head nodding forward slightly before he jerked himself awake. Alexander watched him, debating whether to send him to one of the guest rooms or let him sleep where he was. The boy looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from carrying too much for too long. Before he could decide, Liam's voice broke the silence. Are you going to send me back? The question was so quiet, so filled with uncertainty, that Alexander felt it like a knife to the gut. He set his glass down and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Do you want to go back? Liam shook his head quickly. No. His fingers twisted in the hem of his shirt. I don't have anywhere else. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't equipped to be a guardian, let alone a father. His own childhood had been shaped by boarding schools and distant parents who valued achievement over affection. What did he know about raising a child? But this kid had already lost enough. Then you stay, he said firmly. We'll figure it out. Liam's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected that answer. Really? Alexander nodded. Yeah. He paused, then added, this place has 5 bedrooms. Seems wasteful for just one person, don't you think? It wasn't quite a promise of forever, but it was something. And for now, it seemed to be enough. Liam's shoulders relaxed, the tension draining from his small body as he sank deeper into the couch cushions. Thank you, he whispered, the words almost lost in the vastness of the penthouse. Alexander nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude he wasn't sure he deserved. There's a guest room down the hall. It's yours now. We can make it look more. He gestured vaguely, like a kid's room later. Liam nodded, but made no move to get up. His eyelids were drooping, the day's emotions finally catching up to him. Or you can sleep here tonight, Alexander added, grabbing a cashmere throw from the back of the couch and draping it over the boy. Whatever you want. A few minutes later, Liam was fast asleep, his breathing soft and even. Alexander stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, the lights of Manhattan twinkling like stars fallen to earth. His life had always been meticulously planned, every move calculated, every decision weighed against potential outcomes. In the span of a single day, everything had changed. He had walked into a cemetery expecting to grieve in solitude, and had walked out with a child who might just alter the course of his entire life. His phone buzzed with an incoming message from Daniel. Found preliminary information on the boy. Need to meet tomorrow. Alexander typed a quick response, then silenced his phone. Whatever Daniel had discovered could wait until morning. Tonight, he had a more immediate concern. The sleeping child on his couch who, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, had already begun to matter. He wasn't sure what came next, but for the first time in years, he felt something other than emptiness. It wasn't happiness exactly, more like purpose, a reason to come home that had nothing to do with sleep or shelter. As he turned away from the window, his gaze fell on Evelyn's photograph. "What were you thinking?" he whispered to her silent image. "Why didn't you trust me with this?" The photograph offered no answers, just her enigmatic smile. The same smile he had fallen in love with, the same smile that now seemed to hide more secrets than he had ever imagined. Tomorrow, he would begin unraveling those secrets. But tonight, he would simply watch over the boy who had appeared like a ghost from his wife's past. A boy who, despite everything, had somehow found his way home. Alexander woke up to the faint sound of movement in his penthouse. For a moment, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the events of the previous night. Then reality hit him with the force of a market crash. Liam was here. He wasn't alone anymore. Pushing back the covers, he ran a hand over his face, trying to shake off the exhaustion. He'd spent most of the night alternating between watching Liam sleep and pacing the length of his home office, his mind racing with questions that had no immediate answers. His life had never been quiet. The constant hum of business calls, the ping of urgent emails, the pressure of leading a Fortune 500 company. But this kind of noise, the presence of another person in his space, was something entirely new. As he stepped out into the living room, he found Liam standing by the massive glass windows, staring at the city skyline. The boy was still wrapped in the blanket from the night before, his small frame looking even smaller against the backdrop of towering buildings and the morning sky, tinged with soft hues of orange and pink. Liam turned when he heard Alexander's footsteps, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I didn't know if I should wake you up," he said quietly. Alexander waved a hand dismissively. "You're fine." He glanced at the clock. 6:30 a.m., too early for someone like him who had long since abandoned early mornings in favor of late-night meetings and even later nights drowning himself in work. But something about this morning felt different. There was no business to rush to, no urgent calls demanding his attention, just a kid standing in his penthouse looking like he wasn't sure if he belonged there. "You hungry?" Alexander asked, heading toward the kitchen. Liam hesitated before nodding. "Yeah." Alexander wasn't much of a cook. Most of his meals came from high-end restaurants or were prepared by his part-time housekeeper. But he figured breakfast should be simple enough. He found some eggs in the fridge and cracked them into a pan, the sizzle filling the silence between them. "You ever been to school?" he asked, keeping his voice casual as he stirred the eggs. Liam shifted in his seat at the counter, playing with the edge of the blanket. "A little. Miss Joan tried to homeschool me, but she had too many kids to take care of." Alexander nodded, unsurprised. The foster system was stretched thin, and kids like Liam often fell through the cracks. He wasn't sure how he felt about enrolling Liam in a school yet. His life was anything but normal, and he had no idea how to give the boy that kind of stability. But he knew one thing. The kid deserved a real shot at something better. "We'll figure something out," he said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Liam. "You're smart. I can tell." Liam looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Ow!" Alexander shrugged, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "The way you talk. The questions you ask." He paused. "The way you survived." As they ate, Liam was quiet but not entirely withdrawn. He watched Alexander closely, as if still trying to figure him out. Alexander wasn't sure what the boy saw when he looked at him. A stranger, a lifeline, someone temporary. The idea of being anything permanent in someone's life unsettled him. He had never been good at relationships, at commitment, at anything that required emotional vulnerability. But as he watched Liam push his scrambled eggs around his plate, he knew he had already made a silent commitment, one he couldn't back out of now. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Alexander had called Daniel, instructing him to gather everything they could find about Liam's background, his birth certificate, any medical records, anything that would help him understand what exactly had happened to this kid before he showed up at Evelyn's grave. The more he knew, the better prepared he would be. But the question he hadn't yet answered was what he intended to do with that information. Was he planning to adopt Liam, become his legal guardian? Or was he just keeping him here until he figured out a better solution? He didn't have the answers. And for someone who had built his life on always knowing the next move, that was unsettling. By noon, he had made another decision. Liam needed new clothes. The oversized jacket he had been wearing since the cemetery was clearly not his, and everything about his appearance screamed neglect. Alexander wasn't sure how to shop for a kid, but he knew someone who did. After a quick phone call, he found himself sitting in the back seat of his car with Liam beside him, on their way to Fifth Avenue where his assistant Rebecca was waiting. She was efficient, sharp, and the only person who could handle Alexander's unpredictable demands without missing a beat. She had worked for him for years, but even she looked surprised when she saw him step out of the car with a child in tow. "You didn't tell me you had a kid," she said, raising an eyebrow. Alexander shot her a look. "I don't." He didn't elaborate. He wasn't ready to explain Evelyn's secrets to anyone, not even Rebecca. Liam stood close to him, clearly unsure of Rebecca's presence. She softened when she looked at him, crouching slightly to meet his eye level. "Hey there," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Rebecca. What's your name?" Liam hesitated before answering. "Liam." "Nice to meet you, Liam," she said, straightening up. "Let's get you some cool clothes, okay?" The shopping trip was smoother than Alexander expected, mostly because Rebecca took charge. She had an eye for detail and a way of making Liam feel comfortable that Alexander envied. He watched as Liam slowly started to relax, picking out things he liked, even smiling once or twice. It was strange seeing the boy come to life in a way that hadn't been there the night before. When they were done, Liam had a new wardrobe, and Alexander had the creeping realization that he was settling into something that felt dangerously close to responsibility. That evening, after a dinner of takeout from Alexander's favorite Italian restaurant, he met with Daniel in his home office while Liam watched television in the living room. Something animated that Rebecca had recommended. "What did you find?" Alexander asked without preamble as Daniel spread files across his desk. Daniel, a former FBI agent with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that missed nothing, opened the first folder. Liam Carter, born August 12, 2017, at New York Presbyterian. Mother listed as Evelyn Carter, father unknown. Alexander's jaw tightened. "She never told me she was pregnant." "Because she wasn't, at least not while you were together," Daniel said, sliding a document across the desk. "According to this, she gave birth to Liam about a year before you met her." Alexander stared at the birth certificate, the date confirming Daniel's words. "That's impossible. We met at a charity gala in 2018. She never mentioned having a child." "She didn't just not mention him," Daniel continued, his voice careful. "She legally surrendered him 3 days after birth, signed away her parental rights, but with an unusual stipulation. She wanted visitation. Which they granted," Alexander said, remembering what Miss Joan had told him. Daniel nodded. "It's not common, but it happens. She visited him regularly at first, then less frequently as the years went on." He hesitated. "There's more. I found records of payments from her personal account to the shelter, substantial ones, far more than a kindergarten teacher should have been able to afford. Alexander frowned. Evelyn was a teacher when we met. She quit after we got married. A teacher who somehow managed to donate over $50,000 to a Brooklyn shelter in the year before she met you, Daniel said, sliding another document forward. Either she was independently wealthy, or someone was helping her, Alexander finished, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Did you find out who the father is? Daniel's expression grew more guarded. Not definitively, but there are some clues. Evelyn filed a petition for child support about 6 months after Liam was born, but withdrew it a week later. The man she named in the petition was. A knock at the door interrupted them. Alexander looked up to see Liam standing in the doorway, his new pajamas slightly too big, making him look even smaller. I'm tired, he said simply. Alexander nodded, closing the folder on his desk. I'll show you to your room. He glanced at Daniel. We'll finish this later. Daniel gathered his files and stood. I'll see myself out. We'll talk tomorrow. After showing Liam to the guest room, now his room, Alexander reminded himself. He helped the boy get settled. The room was sparsely decorated, with just a queen-sized bed, a dresser, and a nightstand. Nothing like a child's room should be. Another thing to fix. Is this okay for tonight? Alexander asked, feeling strangely inadequate. We can make it more. Yours tomorrow. Liam nodded, climbing into the bed that was far too big for him. It's nice, he said, and Alexander could tell he meant it. How low must the bar be set when a plain guest room felt luxurious? If you need anything, I'm just down the hall, Alexander said, turning to leave. Mr. Carter? Liam's voice stopped him at the door. Alexander, he corrected gently. Just call me Alexander. Liam nodded. Alexander, thank you. The simple gratitude hit him harder than it should have. Get some sleep, kid. Later that night, after Liam had fallen asleep, Alexander returned to his office and reopened Daniel's files. He needed to know everything. Who Liam's father was, why Evelyn had given him up, why she had kept him a secret all these years. The answers were buried somewhere in these documents, and Alexander wouldn't rest until he found them. He owed it to Liam, and, in a way, he owed it to Evelyn too. As he pored over the files, one name kept appearing in connection with the shelter where Liam had lived, a name that made Alexander's blood run cold. Mark Donovan, CEO of Donovan Industries and Alexander's longtime business rival, had made several anonymous donations to the shelter over the years, each coinciding with Evelyn's visits to Liam. It could be coincidence, but Alexander didn't believe in coincidences. Not in business, and certainly not in this. He picked up his phone and dialed Daniel's number. I need you to look into Mark Donovan's connection to Evelyn, he said when the investigator answered. And I need a DNA test. Discreetly. You think Donovan is the father? Daniel asked, the surprise evident in his voice. Alexander stared at the photograph of Evelyn on his desk, wondering how many secrets those eyes had held. I think there's only one way to find out. That night, Alexander barely slept. The possibility that Mark Donovan, a man known for his ruthless business tactics and callous disregard for others, might be Liam's father was troubling enough. But the implications of what that might mean for Liam's future kept him awake until dawn. If Donovan was the father, and if he found out about Liam, what would he do? Would he try to claim the boy? Use him as a pawn? Or worse, reject him completely? Alexander found himself standing in the doorway of Liam's room, watching the boy sleep peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. In just 2 days, this child had somehow become his responsibility, his to protect. And protect him he would, no matter what the DNA test revealed, no matter who Liam's father turned out to be. Because some things were more important than blood. Some bonds were formed in moments of need, in silent promises made in the dead of night. And Alexander had made such a promise. To himself, to Evelyn's memory, and most importantly, to Liam. The boy would not be abandoned again. Not on his watch. Alexander knew he was walking on thin ice. Keeping the paternity test results a secret was risky, but he couldn't let Mark Donovan take control of Liam's life. The boy had already endured enough instability, and Alexander wasn't going to let another powerful man treat him like an asset to be claimed. The DNA test results had arrived that morning, delivered personally by Daniel in a sealed envelope. Alexander had opened it in his office, the door locked, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was about to discover. The clinical language of the report couldn't mask the undeniable truth. Mark Donovan was Liam's biological father with a 99.9% probability. Alexander had stared at the paper for a long time, the implications sinking in like a stone in water, creating ripples that would eventually reach the shore. Mark Donovan, ruthless billionaire, corporate raider, and Alexander's longtime business rival, had fathered a child with Evelyn before she met Alexander. It explained so much. Why she had given up Liam, why she had kept him a secret, why she had chosen a shelter far from their social circles. She had been protecting Liam from Donovan, and now that responsibility fell to Alexander. The weight of the truth pressed on him daily, and he knew it was only a matter of time before something forced his hand. Donovan had resources, connections, and an uncanny ability to uncover information others wanted kept hidden. If he ever discovered Liam's existence and his own paternity, he would act swiftly and without mercy. Meanwhile, Liam had begun to settle into his new life. The guest room had been transformed into a proper bedroom for a 6-year-old boy, with a twin bed covered in superhero sheets, bookshelves filled with stories, and a desk where he could draw or build with the Lego sets Rebecca had insisted were essential. Alexander had hired a tutor to assess Liam's education level and begin filling the gaps left by his irregular schooling. Though Liam still carried an air of caution, he wasn't used to the idea of permanence, and Alexander understood why. There were moments, small fleeting moments, when Alexander saw glimpses of the child Liam could have been if life had been kinder to him. Like when they visited a bookstore in Midtown and Liam's eyes lit up at the shelves stacked high with stories, his fingers trailing reverently over the colorful spines as he whispered, "I can pick any of them." Or when they took a walk along the Hudson River and Liam, for the first time, asked Alexander a question about his childhood. "Did you like boats when you were little?" These moments told Alexander that despite everything, Liam still had hope buried somewhere deep inside him. Hope that this time might be different, that this home might last. One evening, Alexander returned from work earlier than usual. He had been making a conscious effort to be home before Liam's bedtime, a practice that had raised eyebrows among his executive team, who were accustomed to his punishing work schedule. But priorities changed, sometimes in ways you never expected. He found Liam sitting at the dining table with an open book in front of him. The boy wasn't reading, though. He was staring at the pages as if lost in thought, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Something on your mind?" Alexander asked as he set down his briefcase. Liam hesitated before nodding. "I was thinking about my mom," he admitted quietly. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat across from him, loosening his tie. "What about her?" Liam traced a finger along the edge of the book, a habit Alexander had noticed when the boy was working through difficult thoughts. "She worked a lot. I didn't always understand why she was so tired all the time, but now I do." He looked up, his eyes reflecting wisdom beyond his years. "She was trying to make sure we were okay. But I think she was sad too." Alexander felt a pang of sympathy. Evelyn had done her best, but she had carried burdens no one should have to bear alone. The secret of Liam's birth, the fear of Mark Donovan, the guilt of giving up her child, it must have weighed on her every day. "She loved you," Alexander said, the words coming easier than he expected. "That much is clear." Liam nodded, but didn't look up. "Do you think she knew who my dad was?" The question made Alexander pause. Liam had never asked so directly before. Carefully, he chose his words, aware that whatever he said would shape Liam's understanding of his own history. "I think she had her suspicions," he said, "but maybe she wasn't sure if he would be the kind of father you deserved." Liam looked up then, his eyes sharp with understanding. "So he's a bad guy?" Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "How do you explain someone like Mark Donovan to a child?" "Not necessarily," he said, choosing honesty over simplicity. "But he's powerful. And sometimes powerful people don't make the best decisions when it comes to family." Liam studied him for a moment, his gaze unervingly perceptive. "Do you know who he is?" Alexander's chest tightened. This was the moment he had been dreading since he received the test results. He could lie, create some fiction about an unknown father, but Liam deserved better than that. He deserved the truth, even if it was complicated. Liam, you do, Liam interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. You know, and you didn't tell me. Alexander leaned forward, his voice firm but calm. I was trying to protect you. I needed to be sure before I said anything. Liam's hands clenched into fists on the tabletop. Who is he? Alexander hesitated, but he knew he couldn't lie. Not to this boy who had already been lied to by omission for his entire life. Mark Donovan. The name meant nothing to Liam at first. He frowned, trying to place it. Then realization dawned and his face darkened. The billionaire? The one on TV all the time. Alexander nodded, watching Liam carefully for his reaction. Liam's expression twisted with anger and disbelief. He knew about me and didn't care? Alexander shook his head quickly. He doesn't know yet. Your mother never told him, and I only found out recently. Liam stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor, the sound harsh in the quiet apartment. So what happens now? Are you going to tell him? The anger in his voice wasn't just directed at Mark Donovan. It was directed at Alexander too, and that hurt more than he wanted to admit. He had been trying to protect Liam, but from the boy's perspective, he had just been keeping more secrets. Not unless you want me to, Alexander said evenly, meeting Liam's gaze. This is your life, Liam. You have a say in what happens next. Liam paced the room, his emotions warring within him. He was just a child, yet he was being asked to make decisions that would affect the rest of his life. It wasn't fair, but then again, very little in Liam's life had been fair so far. What if he finds out anyway? Liam asked, his voice cracking slightly. What if he tries to take me away? The fear in his question was palpable, and Alexander felt a surge of protectiveness unlike anything he had experienced before. He stood and placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder, forcing Liam to look at him. I won't let that happen, he said, the promise in his voice absolute. No one is taking you anywhere unless you want to go. Liam searched his face, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, he exhaled shakily and nodded. That night, as Alexander lay in bed, he knew things had changed. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Liam had a father, a powerful one, and sooner or later, Mark Donovan would find out. When that day came, Alexander would be ready. He had promised Liam that he wouldn't let anyone take him away, and he intended to keep that promise, no matter what it took. The confrontation came sooner than Alexander expected. 3 days after his conversation with Liam, he was in a board meeting when his assistant rushed in, her face pale with urgency. Sir, she said breathlessly, there's someone here to see you. He says it's important. Alexander frowned, already sensing trouble. Who is it? Mark Donovan. The name sent a cold shock throughout Alexander's system. He forced himself to remain composed as he stood, straightening his suit jacket. Tell him I'll be right there. His board members exchanged curious glances. A visit from Mark Donovan was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but Alexander offered no explanation as he left the room. Where is he? He asked his assistant as they walked briskly down the hallway. In the lobby. I didn't want to him up without your approval. Alexander nodded, grateful for her discretion. Good. I'll handle it from here. When he stepped into the lobby, Alexander knew he was walking on thin ice. Keeping the paternity test results a secret was risky, but he couldn't let Mark Donovan take control of Liam's life. The boy had already endured enough instability, and Alexander wasn't going to let another powerful man treat him like an asset to be claimed. However, the weight of the truth pressed on him daily, and he knew it was only a matter of time before something forced his hand. 3 weeks had passed since he'd found Liam at Evelyn's grave. The boy had begun to settle into his new life, though he still carried an air of caution about him. Alexander understood why. Liam wasn't used to the idea of permanence. Trust wasn't something that came easily to a child who had been shuttled between foster homes, never knowing when the next move might come. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when Alexander saw glimpses of the child Liam could have been if life had been kinder to him. Like when they visited a bookstore in Midtown and Liam's eyes lit up at the shelves stacked high with stories. or when they took a walk along the Hudson River and Liam, for the first time, asked Alexander a question about his childhood. These moments told Alexander that despite everything, Liam still had hope buried somewhere deep inside him. They had fallen into a routine of sorts. Morning started with breakfast together before Alexander headed to the office. Rebecca would stay with Liam during the day, helping him with reading and math while Alexander worked on finding a suitable school. Evenings were spent in the penthouse, usually with takeout and conversations that grew less awkward with each passing day. One evening, Alexander returned home to find Liam sitting at the dining table with an open book in front of him. The boy wasn't reading, though. He was staring at the pages as if lost in thought. "Something on your mind?" Alexander asked as he set down his briefcase. Liam hesitated before nodding. "I was thinking about my mom," he admitted quietly. Alexander pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "What about her?" Liam traced a finger along the edge of the book. "She worked a lot. I didn't always understand why she was so tired all the time, but now I do." He glanced up at Alexander. "She was trying to make sure we were okay. But I think she was sad too." Alexander felt a pang of sympathy. Evelyn had done her best, but she had carried burdens no one should have to bear alone. "She loved you," Alexander said. "That much is clear." Liam nodded, but didn't look up. "Do you think she knew who my dad was?" The question made Alexander pause. Liam had never asked so directly before. The DNA test results had confirmed what he'd suspected. Mark Donovan was Liam's biological father, but he hadn't shared this information with the boy yet. Carefully, he chose his words. "I think she had her suspicions," he said, "but maybe she wasn't sure if he would be the kind of father you deserved." Liam looked up then, his eyes sharp with understanding. "So he's a bad guy?" Alexander exhaled. "Not necessarily, but he's powerful, and sometimes powerful people don't make the best decisions when it comes to family." Liam studied him for a moment. "Do you know who he is?" Alexander's chest tightened. This was the moment he had been dreading. "You do," Liam interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, and you didn't tell me." Alexander leaned forward, his voice firm but calm. "I was trying to protect you. I needed to be sure before I said anything." Liam's hands clenched into fists. "Who is he?" Alexander hesitated, but he knew he couldn't lie. "Not now." "Mark Donovan." The name meant nothing to Liam at first. He frowned, trying to place it. Then realization dawned, and his face darkened. "The billionaire? The one on TV all the time?" Alexander nodded. Liam's expression twisted with anger and disbelief. "He knew about me and didn't care?" Alexander shook his head quickly. "He doesn't know yet. Your mother never told him, and I only found out recently." Liam stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. "So what happens now? Are you going to tell him?" The anger in his voice wasn't just directed at Mark Donovan. It was directed at Alexander too, and that hurt more than he wanted to admit. "Not unless you want me to," Alexander said evenly. "This is your life, Liam. You have a say in what happens next." Liam paced the room, his emotions warring within him. "What if he finds out anyway? What if he tries to take me away?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying his fear beneath the anger. Alexander stood and placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "I won't let that happen," he said. "No one is taking you anywhere unless you want to go." Liam searched his face, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, he exhaled shakily and nodded. That night, as Alexander lay in bed, he knew things had changed. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Liam had a father, a powerful one, and sooner or later, Mark Donovan would find out. When that day came, Alexander would be ready. He had promised Liam that he wouldn't let anyone take him away, and he intended to keep that promise, no matter what it took. The next morning, Alexander woke to a call from his security team. "Sir, there's a situation in the lobby. Mark Donovan is here, demanding to see you." Alexander's heart raced, but his voice remained steady. "Keep him there. I'll be down in 10 minutes. He dressed quickly, his mind racing. How had Donovan found out? Who had leaked the information? It didn't matter now. What mattered was protecting Liam. He found the boy in the kitchen, pouring cereal into a bowl. "Liam," he said, keeping his voice calm, "I need to go downstairs for a meeting. Rebecca will be here soon. Stay with her until I get back, okay?" Liam looked up, sensing the tension. Is everything okay? Alexander forced a smile. Everything's fine. Just some business to take care of. When the elevator doors opened to the lobby, Alexander spotted Mark Donovan immediately. The man had a commanding presence, tall, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to getting his way. His tailored suit spoke of wealth and power, much like Alexander's own. Donovan, Alexander greeted coolly as he approached. Mark's icy blue eyes locked onto Alexander's. Carter, we need to talk. Alexander gestured toward a private conference room off the lobby, leading the billionaire inside. The moment the door shut, Mark wasted no time. I assume you know why I'm here. Alexander met his gaze evenly. I can guess. Mark folded his arms. I don't like being kept in the dark, especially about something this significant. And what exactly do you consider significant? Alexander asked carefully. Mark's expression hardened. A child. My child. Silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Alexander had expected this confrontation, but now that it was happening, he realized just how much he despised the idea of Mark Donovan asserting any kind of claim over Liam. What do you want, Mark? He asked finally. What do you think? Mark leaned forward slightly. I want to meet my son. Alexander's jaw tightened. He's not just some trophy you get to claim now that you know he exists. Mark's eyes flashed with irritation. I never said he was. But you don't get to make this decision for him, either. Alexander exhaled slowly, trying to keep his temper in check. He doesn't even know if he wants to meet you. I promised him he'd have a choice in this, and I intend to keep that promise. Mark studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Fine. I won't force anything, but I want to send him a message. Alexander hesitated, then relented. I'll give it to him, but no pressure, no manipulation. If he doesn't want contact, you back off. Mark smirked. We'll see. Later that evening, Alexander sat with Liam at the dinner table, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. He pulled out the sealed envelope and set it on the table. It's from Mark, he said simply. Liam stared at it as if it were a ticking bomb. What does it say? I don't know, Alexander admitted. I told him I let you decide if you wanted to read it. Liam hesitated for a long time before reaching for the envelope. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the letter inside. Alexander watched as Liam's expression shifted from uncertainty to confusion. Then something else, something unreadable. Finally, Liam set the letter down and looked up. He wants to meet me. His voice was unreadable, but his hands trembled slightly. Alexander kept his tone even. And do you want to meet him? Liam swallowed hard. I don't know, he admitted, but I think I need to. Alexander nodded, his chest tight with unease. He had known this moment would come. He just hadn't expected it to come so soon. If that's what you want, he said, I'll be right there with you. Liam looked relieved. You'll come too. Every step of the way, Alexander promised. You're not doing this alone. 3 days later, they stood outside an upscale restaurant in Manhattan where Mark had suggested they meet. Liam was dressed in new clothes, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes betrayed his nervousness. Remember, Alexander said, kneeling to Liam's eye level, you don't have to say or do anything you don't want to. If at any point you want to leave, just say the word. Liam nodded, taking a deep breath. Okay. As they walked into the restaurant, Alexander spotted Mark immediately, sitting at a corner table. The man stood as they approached, his eyes fixed on Liam with an intensity that made Alexander instinctively move closer to the boy. Liam, Mark said, his voice softer than Alexander had ever heard it. I'm Mark. It's good to meet you. Liam said nothing, just stared up at the man who shared his DNA. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Shall we sit? He suggested, breaking the awkward silence. The lunch that followed was tense, filled with careful questions from Mark and short answers from Liam. Alexander watched the exchange like a hawk, ready to intervene at the first sign of distress from the boy. Did you know about me? Liam finally asked, the question cutting through the polite conversation. Mark's expression faltered. No, he said honestly. I didn't. Your mother and I, we weren't together long. She never told me she was pregnant. Would you have wanted me? If you knew. Liam pressed, his voice small but determined. Mark hesitated, And in that moment of hesitation, Alexander saw the truth. Mark Donovan might be many things: ruthless, ambitious, calculating, but he wasn't prepared for the raw honesty of a child's question. "I don't know what I would have done then," Mark admitted finally. "I was different back then, focused only on my business. But now," he looked directly at Liam, "now I would like the chance to know you, if you'll let me." The rest of the meal passed in a blur of cautious conversation. As they were preparing to leave, Mark pulled out a small box and handed it to Liam. "This was mine when I was your age," he said. "I thought you might like it." Liam opened the box to find a vintage pocket watch, its gold surface gleaming under the restaurant lights. "Thank you," he said quietly, the first genuine emotion he'd shown toward Mark. Outside the restaurant, Mark pulled Alexander aside while Liam waited by the car. "I want to be part of his life," Mark said without preamble. Alexander's expression hardened. "That's up to Liam." "I know that," Mark conceded, "but I also know you've been taking care of him. Don't think I don't recognize what you've done for him." Alexander was surprised by the acknowledgement. "He needed someone." Mark nodded. "Yes, he did. And he found you." He paused. "I'm not trying to take him away, Carter. I just want a chance to know my son." Alexander studied the man who had been his business rival for years, trying to gauge his sincerity. "We'll take it slow," he said finally. "Liam's been through enough. He needs stability, not confusion." "Agreed," Mark said, extending his hand. "We can work together on this. For his sake." Alexander hesitated before shaking Mark's hand. It wasn't a truce, exactly, but it was a start. On the drive home, Liam was quiet, turning the pocket watch over in his hands. "What did you think?" Alexander asked carefully. Liam considered the question. "He's different than I thought he would be." "How so?" "He seemed nervous." Liam looked up at Alexander. "Do you think he really wants to know me? Or is he just pretending?" Alexander chose his words carefully. "I think he's just learning what it means to be a father. That takes time." Liam nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. "Can we still go to the park tomorrow? Like we planned?" The question caught Alexander off guard. With all the drama surrounding Mark Donovan, he had half expected Liam to be consumed with thoughts of his newfound father. Instead, the boy was asking about their regular Saturday routine, a simple trip to Central Park, feeding the ducks, maybe getting ice cream afterward. "Of course," Alexander said, feeling something warm spread through his chest. "Nothing's changed, Liam. Not unless you want it to." That night, after Liam had gone to bed, Alexander stood on his balcony, looking out over the city. The meeting with Mark had gone better than expected, but he wasn't naive enough to think this was the end of it. Mark Donovan was used to getting what he wanted, and what he wanted now was a relationship with his son. But so did Alexander. In just a few short weeks, Liam had become more than just a responsibility to him. The boy had awakened something in Alexander that he thought had died with Evelyn: the capacity to care deeply, to put someone else's needs before his own. It wasn't the same as the love he'd felt for his wife, but it was just as powerful, just as transformative. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Paperwork is ready. Appointment with the lawyer tomorrow at 2. Alexander typed a quick reply, then put his phone away. The temporary guardianship papers were just the first step. If Liam wanted, if they both wanted, there could be more permanent arrangements later. But for now, this was enough. Legal protection, a stable home, and the promise that no matter what happened with Mark Donovan, Liam would not have to face it alone. As he turned to go inside, Alexander caught sight of Liam standing in the doorway, his small figure silhouetted against the warm light of the penthouse. "Couldn't sleep?" Alexander asked. Liam shook his head. "I was thinking." "About what?" Liam came to stand beside him at the railing, looking out at the city lights. "About family. Miss Joan always said that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who sticks around when things get hard." Alexander felt his throat tighten. "Miss Jones sounds pretty smart." "Yeah," Liam agreed. "She also said that sometimes family finds you when you're not even looking for it." Alexander placed a gentle hand on Liam's shoulder. "I think she might be right about that, too." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city below. Alexander didn't know what the future held, whether Mark Donovan would prove to be a positive presence in Liam's life or a complication they would have to navigate. He didn't know if the legal system would recognize the bond that had formed between him and this child who had appeared so unexpectedly in his life. But he did know one thing. He would be there for Liam every step of the way. Not because of any obligation to Evelyn's memory, not because of any sense of duty, but because somewhere along the way, this lost boy had found a place in his heart. And that, Alexander realized, was worth fighting for. Liam sat in the back seat of Alexander's car, staring out at the skyline of New York City as they approached the restaurant where he was set to meet his father for the first time. His hands were clenched together in his lap, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. What if Mark Donovan wasn't the man he imagined? What if he was cold, indifferent, or worse? What if he wanted nothing more than to erase Liam from his life? The anxiety in his chest tightened as the car slowed down in front of an upscale restaurant in Manhattan. Alexander placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this," he reminded him softly. Liam swallowed hard and nodded. "I know, but I need to." He stepped out of the car, his heart pounding as he walked toward the entrance. The maitre d' immediately led him to a private section of the restaurant, and there, at a table near the window, sat Mark Donovan. The man looked as powerful as he did in the newspapers. Sharp suit, perfectly styled hair, the air of authority that made him stand out in any room. But as Liam approached, he noticed something unexpected. Mark wasn't looking at him with indifference or calculation. His expression was something else entirely. Uncertainty, maybe even nervousness. "Liam," Mark said, standing up as the boy reached the table. "I'm glad you came." Liam nodded, sitting down across from him. For a moment there was silence. Then Mark exhaled, leaning forward slightly. "I don't expect you to trust me," he admitted. "I don't expect you to even like me. But I need you to know I didn't know about you. If I had," his voice trailed off, as if he wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. Liam studied him carefully, trying to decide if he believed him. "Why did my mom keep me away from you?" he finally asked. Mark's jaw tightened. "Because she didn't trust me," he admitted. "And I can't blame her for that. I was young, ambitious, and more focused on building an empire than on anything else. But if she had told me, if I had known," he shook his head, "I would have done things differently." Liam wasn't sure how to respond to that. A part of him wanted to believe him. Another part wondered if it even mattered anymore. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. Mark's gaze softened. "Nothing. I just want to know you." The conversation continued, slow and cautious, as they talked about small things, Liam's interests, his life with Alexander. Mark listened intently, occasionally asking questions but never pushing too hard. For the first time, Liam realized that this man, his father, was just as uncertain about this meeting as he was. As the evening went on, Mark hesitated before reaching into his pocket and pulling out an envelope. "I don't want to overwhelm you," he said, sliding it across the table, "but I wanted to give you this." Liam picked it up, looking at him questioningly. "What is it?" "A letter," Mark said. "I wrote it the night I found out about you. It's everything I wanted to say, but didn't know how." Liam hesitated, then tucked the envelope into his pocket. He wasn't sure when, if ever, he would read it, but for now it felt like enough to know that it existed. As they finished their meal, Mark cleared his throat. "I know I can't change the past," he said, "but if you ever want to talk, if you ever want to be a part of my life, the door is open." Liam looked at him for a long moment before finally nodding. "Okay." It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a commitment, but it was a start. When Liam stepped outside, Alexander was waiting for him by the car. He studied the boy's face carefully. "How did it go?" Liam exhaled, glancing back toward the restaurant before looking at Alexander. "Better than I expected." Alexander smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's all that matters." As they drove home, Liam took the envelope out of his pocket, running his fingers over the edges. He didn't open it yet, but for the first time since he could remember, he felt a sense of possibility, a feeling that his story wasn't just about loss and abandonment, but might also include finding and belonging. The next few weeks brought changes to their lives. Mark called regularly, and Liam gradually began to look forward to their conversations. Alexander watched this developing relationship with a mixture of caution and acceptance. His priority remained Liam's well-being, But he couldn't deny that the boy seemed lighter somehow, as if knowing where he came from had helped him better understand where he might be going. One evening, as Alexander was reviewing contracts in his home office, Liam appeared in the doorway, clutching a piece of paper. "What's that?" Alexander asked, setting aside his work. Liam approached, placing the paper on the desk. It was a family tree assignment from the tutor Alexander had hired. At the top was Liam's name, with branches extending to both Mark and Evelyn. But there was another addition, off to the side, connected to Liam by a dotted line labeled Guardian, was Alexander's name. "Is this okay?" Liam asked hesitantly. The teacher said family trees can look different for different people. Alexander felt something catch in his throat as he looked at the simple drawing. "It's more than okay," he said quietly. Liam nodded, relief washing over his face. "I wasn't sure if... I know you're not really my dad, but... Family isn't just about blood, Liam," Alexander interrupted gently. "It's about who's there for you, who you can count on." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I want you to know that you can count on me. Always." The boy's eyes brightened. "Even if Mark wants me to live with him someday." Alexander felt a pang at the thought, but he kept his expression steady. "Even then, whatever happens, wherever you go, you'll always have a place here." That night, after Liam had gone to bed, Alexander received a call from Mark. "I've been thinking," Mark said without preamble, "about Liam's future." Alexander tensed. "What about it?" "He needs stability, structure, a permanent home." "He has that," Alexander replied, an edge to his voice. "I know," Mark said, surprising him. "With you. I'm not blind, Carter. I see how he looks at you, how he's flourished these past months." He paused. "That's why I've decided not to pursue full custody." Alexander was stunned into silence. "Don't misunderstand," Mark continued. "I want to be part of his life. Regular visits, holidays, all of that. But uprooting him now, making him start over again, that's not what's best for him." "Why the change of heart?" Alexander asked, suspicious. Mark was quiet for a moment. "Because I'm not the only parent who failed him," he said finally. "I may not have known about him, but I created a life where Evelyn felt she couldn't tell me about her child. That's on me." His voice grew firmer. "I won't fail him again by putting my wants above his needs." After the call ended, Alexander stood on his balcony, letting the cool night air clear his thoughts. For weeks, he had been bracing for a custody battle, preparing for the worst. Instead, Mark had surprised him with an unexpected moment of selflessness. Perhaps people could change. Perhaps the ruthless businessman could become a thoughtful father. Perhaps there was room in Liam's life for both of them. The next morning, Alexander found Liam already awake, sitting at the kitchen counter with Mark's letter finally open in front of him. "You read it," Alexander observed, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Liam nodded. He said he was sorry for not being there, and that he hoped someday I might forgive him. He looked up at Alexander, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think people can really change?" Alexander considered the question, thinking of how his own life had transformed since that day in the cemetery. How the walls he had built around his heart had slowly crumbled in the face of a child's need for connection. "Yes," he said with certainty. "I do." Later that day, as they walked through Central Park, a Saturday ritual that had become sacred to them both, Liam suddenly stopped and looked up at Alexander. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice serious in a way that made him seem older than his years. "About my name." "What about it?" Alexander asked. "I want to change it." "Not all of it," he added quickly. I want to add your name too, if that's okay." Alexander felt his heart skip a beat. "Liam Carter Donovan," he suggested. The boy smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. "Yeah, that sounds right." As they continued their walk, Alexander reflected on the strange, winding path that had led them here. A chance encounter at a cemetery. A secret kept for years. A child who needed a home and a man who needed a reason to come home. None of it made sense, and yet somehow it had created something that did. A family, unconventional and imperfect, but real nonetheless. That evening, as Liam sat at the dining table doing homework, Alexander received a text from Mark. "Liam told me about the name change. It's a good idea. He needs both of us." Alexander typed back a simple reply. "Yes, he does." And for the first time since Evelyn's death, Alexander felt something that had been missing from his life for too long. A sense of purpose beyond the boardroom. A connection that transcended business deals and profit margins. He wasn't just existing anymore. He was living. And that, perhaps, was Evelyn's final gift to them both. A second chance at family, at belonging, at love. As he watched Liam bent over his books, his face scrunched in concentration, Alexander made a silent promise. Not just to the boy, but to himself. He would be the guardian Liam needed, the mentor he deserved, and maybe, someday, the father he had been searching for all along. Not to replace Mark, but to complement him. Not to erase Evelyn's memory, but to honor it by giving her son the life she had wanted for him. One filled with security, opportunity, and most